Well, good morning, everyone. Good morning from the Moravian Archives. I am Paul Pieter, and I'm glad you have all joined us for today's presentation on the history of the Moravian Star by Thomas McCullough. I am standing in our exhibit space, where we currently have a new exhibit, Zinzendorf in America. Zinzendorf was the leader of the Moravian Church who visited Pennsylvania in 1742. The painting you see behind me is one of the centerpieces in this exhibit. It shows Zinzendorf as a young child together with his father and mother. It was painted in the early 1700s, and it is the oldest piece in this exhibit. I understand it may be difficult for you to see the painting as it is fairly dark, and that is the reason I am showing this painting to you now. This painting needs to be cleaned and preserved. Proceeds from our star sales this season will go toward the preservation of this painting. When you purchase an original Moravian star through us until the end of the year, the proceeds will go toward the restoration of this wonderful painting. Our gift shop is open this morning until 1 p.m., or you can order through our website. We will show you the web address after the lecture. If you have any questions about the star, questions for Tom, please put them in the chat. After the lecture, we will be happy to take those questions. This lecture is going to be recorded. In order to protect your privacy, everybody's video is turned off, and please make sure you stay muted. Now, it is my honor and pleasure to introduce to you Thomas McCullough. Thomas is assistant archivist and holds a master's degree in applied history from Shippensburg University and a master's degree in library and information science from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. This morning, Tom will speak on the history of the Moravian Star.
Hopefully everyone can hear me.
Tom, go ahead.
One thumbs up will do. Okay, excellent. So thank you, Paul, for the kind introduction, and thank you all for joining us virtually today to learn more about the Moravian Star. It's nice to see some familiar faces and names, and also some new faces. Today, not only will you enjoy some beautiful photographs of Moravian stars, but I hope more importantly to illuminate for you the history of the Moravian Star and cast a light on the symbolic meaning of this object to Moravians. Okay. So enough of my cheesy star and light puns. Why don't we get to learning? So as Paul mentioned, my name is Thomas McCullough, and I am assistant archivist of the Moravian Archives in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, which makes me a records manager and part-time historian of sorts for Moravian Church congregations in North America. In our collections, we have a wide range of materials from over 100 Moravian Church congregations, dating back to the 1740s. When several communities in the Lehigh Valley were founded by the Moravians. One of these communities was Bethlehem, and here we can see where the archives is conveniently situated in Bethlehem. On this slide, we see a pair of photographs of the Moravian archives, one showing researchers working in our reading room, and another showing two Moravian Advent stars that always figure prominently in our portico every Advent season. It is in this building that I've consulted our extensive library and archives to research and present to you the history and symbolism of the Moravian Star. I know some of you have been here before, but if you haven't, I encourage you to use our extensive collections to explore any lingering questions you might have about the Moravians. You really can't go far in the Lehigh Valley without running into a Moravian Star. They're hanging from porches, roofs, Christmas trees, mantles. The star has really become synonymous with Bethlehem, Nazareth, Winston-Salem, and other Moravian communities. Here you can actually see me back in December 2013 when I first became involved with the Moravian Church. I started working at the archives that year, and the Moravian Stars were a brand new concept to me. But I think working in this Christmas stand on that day really made me particularly interested in the star and where it came from. Moravians and non-Moravians alike have started to adorn hotels, stores, schools, hospitals, community displays, and really wherever it's become customary to decorate for the Christmas season. Moravian stars are also popular at Christmas markets. This is actually a photograph of Christkindlmarkt in Bethlehem. So Moravian stars are always in high demand there and in display there. I mentioned that I became involved with the Moravian Church in 2013. Many residents and folks even display their stars outside of the Advent season. And one place we would find these stars is on households. And as I mentioned, some keep their Moravian stars on permanent display. In 2013, I put together my first Moravian star with my parents, and we hung this at their house in the Philadelphia area, where it has remained year-round. You got it, since 2013. So I'll talk about that a little more and why that's special to me. So typically, Moravian stars have anywhere from 25 to 26 points. This can vary. The pyramid points arise from 17 to 18 square bases and 8 triangular bases. This photograph of a Christmas market in Dresden, Germany shows just a few of the many color combinations in which the stars are sold. I'll stop right here and say that 25 points, according to most German sources, is considered the traditional amount of points. Others might say 26. And this just means that some have added a final point where others would simply have some sort of mounting mechanism, or a cord would come through, an electrical cord for lighting. That would be replaced with a 26 point, where it would normally be empty in that spot. Though there is some variety to Moravian stars, they are really not to be confused with two other very prominent star designs. The first being the Star of Bethlehem, or Bethlehem Star, a local favorite here in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. Not that kind of star. Nor are Moravian stars to be confused with the paper Frobelsterne, or Froebel stars, as seen here in this red paper origami star. So while these are both lovely and both common in Bethlehem and sometimes in other Moravian communities, they aren't technically Moravian stars. So Moravian stars, you'll really find everywhere now. I apologize, this slide always takes a little bit to load because there's a lot going on, but we're getting to see Moravian stars everywhere, and they're even being hung inside of churches. They've made their way into the pulpits of Moravian churches and non-Moravian churches alike. Here you can actually see a Moravian star hung in Palmyra Moravian Church in New Jersey in December 1980. Here's another sanctuary. I know we have a number of listeners today from North Carolina. Here is First Moravian Church in Greensboro, North Carolina, from an old postcard that we have here at the archives. You can actually see another church with a Moravian star hanging in the pulpit. But the stars didn't just make their way to the United States out of thin air. Where were they? Were they first made here in the United States? Where did they come from? And I guess in order to answer that question, we should start with another basic question about who are the Moravians and where do they come from? The Moravian Church traces its origins back to 1457, when the Unitas Fratrum was organized in Moravia, part of today's Czech Republic. So if you can see my mouse, that would be right here. Today's Czech Republic, it started in the middle, in a region called Moravia. The Unitas Fratrum eventually established itself as a Protestant religious group organized in several provinces. And during and after the 30 Years' War, many of these church members were displaced or began to worship underground. Eventually, in the early 1700s, people began to find refuge on an estate in this area of Germany that converges with Poland and the Czech Republic. You'll see a little area that juts down into the Czech Republic. This is sometimes called the Dreiländer Eck. And it was on this piece of land where there was the estate of Nicholas Ludwig von Zinzendorf, a Saxon court official, where the church organized the community of Herrnhut in the 1720s. After a couple of years, the deeply religious community committed itself to worldwide missionary endeavors. Zinzendorf came to the North American colonies in 1740, establishing the community of Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, where me and the archives are currently located. Bethlehem in many ways served as a jumping off point for missionary work and itinerant preaching in the colonies. But here, we have little evidence of Moravian stars in the first years of the fledgling community. For our first clues, we actually need to head back across the Atlantic Ocean. Moravian making of stars dates back to the earliest times of Moravian settlements in Europe. Because Moravians were and remain excellent record keepers, we are blessed to have a wide variety of sources that shed light on Moravian traditions. Manuscripts in the collections of Moravian archives confirm that Moravians first incorporated stars into the decor of their settlements across Europe. Our first journey takes us to Herrnhut, a former Moravian settlement not far from Frankfurt am Main in Germany. Paul Pieter, director of the Moravian Archives, who you first heard at the beginning of this presentation, first uncovered evidence of Moravians and ornamental stars in the 1747 diary of Herrnhut. So a diary was kept daily by the pastor, and they recounted that colored stars were hung in the windows of various buildings in 1747. The exact shape of these stars remains a mystery, and thus a direct connection cannot be made with these stars that we hear of in this diary and our modern notion of those exceptional shape Moravian stars. What you see here is a 1750s view of Herrnhut, probably from about 1750. And perhaps you can imagine these buildings with little stars in the windows lighting up the perfectly gridded squares. Must have looked really beautiful at night. But the question arises, why stars in the windows? Why not some other shape? Is it simply because Moravians saw stars in the sky and thought, wow, those would be great to recreate as decorations? Of course, it's more complicated than that. When I originally became interested in Moravian stars and their history, I was fortunate to stumble across this 1959 leaflet from Home Moravian Church in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. This leaflet, which explains Moravian traditions, we see that Moravian Church is a Christocentric church. We see on the bottom left, the Moravian seal with the Lamb of God. We see the daily text. We see Love Feast in the bottom right corner. We also see that the Moravian star figures prominently in church tradition, so prominently that it is adjacent to Jesus Christ on this pamphlet. The Moravian star, according to the pamphlet, represents the star which led the wise men to Bethlehem in search of the newborn King of the Jews. Citing Revelation 22:16, we learn that the Moravian star is symbolic of Jesus who said, quote, I, Jesus, am the bright and morning star, end quote. Christian symbolism of stars through biblical interpretation is the most reasonable explanation for the Moravian use of stars in ornamentation. There are other biblical references to the Star of Bethlehem and Jesus as light of the world. These biblical references were then incorporated into song, increasing the symbolism of stars within the Moravian Church. Most Moravians would immediately recognize the hymn, Morning Star, O Cheering Sight. Zinzendorf enjoyed this old poem from Johannes Scheffler and incorporated it into the Moravian hymnal during his lifetime. The lyrics and accompaniment that we know today were composed later by Moravian minister Francis Florentine Hagen. So normally, I give my best attempt at delivering the soprano solo whenever I present the history of the Moravian star in person. But since we're on Zoom, I'll leave that to the professionals here, especially in the virtual environment. Hopefully you can hear a snippet of the hymn in this lovely 2007 rendition from Rejoice, Rejoice, Believers from Moravian Music Foundation. So if you enjoyed that, that was from the 2007 Rejoice, Rejoice, Believers. which was kindly lent to me by Gwyneth Michael from the Moravian Music Foundation. It is a wonderful CD. Okay. So we understand the symbolism associated with the Moravian star as it is taken from biblical passages and then incorporated into music. But when were the traditional stars as we know today first created by Moravians? Well, let's head to the year 1773. This photograph here shows handwritten geometry exercises from a textbook of a 13-year-old student at the Moravian boarding school in Niesky, Germany. Dating back to 1773, this image, featured in Dorothea Tyler's book, Und leuchtet in die ganze Welt, was previously presented as the earliest hint of a Moravian star in the shape that we know them today. Yes, no Moravian star is actually visible in these drawings. However, Tyler pointed out that one can see the paper slots made at the bottom of this particular figure for adding glue. Moreover, one could speculate that the earliest Moravian stars were the result of such exercises, which called for gluing various shapes together, perhaps a tradition born out of geometry and mathematics instruction. A few years ago, I worked on a small display about Moravian education in America. And in the process, I came across a workbook of geometry exercises here in the Moravian Archives that, based on the familiar handwriting, could be attributed to a man named Johann Arbo. Arbo arrived in America from Europe in 1760, and as Vorsteher, which means warden, of the Single Brethren in Bethlehem, Arbo was responsible for many building projects and industrial trades in Bethlehem. So if this workbook did in fact belong to Arbo, we can narrow down the date of these drawings from 1760 until Arbo's death in 1772. As one can see, we see here what is called a rhombocuboktahedron, or what Arbo calls an octahedron truncatum. So I liken this to a stop sign that is three-dimensional, or an octagon that is three-dimensional. That's the easiest way to think about this shape here. But as a person who has devoted their life to the study of history and done everything possible to run from mathematics, I am both impressed and frightened by the calculus work here that makes this geometric shape possible. So you can see some of those calculations that Arbo is doing in order to create this shape. But it is this Archimedean solid, as I mentioned, the rhombocuboktahedron, that forms the basis of the traditional Moravian star. There are 26 faces, as you can see, on this solid. There are 8 triangular faces, and there are 18 square. What's missing that would make this solid a Moravian star are the pyramid sunburst points attached to each face. However, just a few pages later in Arbo's book of geometry exercises, we find these triangular and square pyramids, and likewise how to construct them out of paper. You can then imagine how an instructor might ask their students or apprentices in training to put these shapes together, resulting in our beloved Moravian star. But alas, because this is not a Moravian Advent star in its entirety, we must jump ahead about 50 years to Niesky, Germany for the next chapter in this saga. Despite those early geometry exercises we saw from the 1700s, oral tradition and several manuscript accounts had suggested that the first Moravian star was, quote, invented sometime in the early to mid 19th century at the Moravian boarding school for boys in Niesky, Germany. Here is a modern photograph of Niesky. With the church in the background, we are looking at the square that is familiarly known as the Zinzendorfplatz. In the memoir or Lebenslauf of Moravian minister Heinz Schmidt, we read that, quote, after the Battle of Waterloo in 1815, an officer appeared in Niesky, Germany. As an educator, he understood the difficulties the students were having with mathematics. During some dreary November days, he built all kinds of shapes. These were wrapped with tissue paper and lit from within. Those best shapes were then finished with pyramid-shaped points. The high point of this was gluing the points on the evening before the first Sunday of Advent, and a star was created. So supposedly, the mathematically skilled educator who, in order to illustrate mathematics, worked with cutting and gluing these square bodies or polyhedra, and he took a common geometric shape called the rhombocuboktahedron. It's a mouthful, but it's common. And by adding those polyhedra, he created an even bigger mouthful, the Great Stellated Rhombocuboctahedron. This photograph here depicts the Knabenanstalt, or boys' boarding school in Niesky, where various stories told of math teachers or students there inventing the star. The earliest reference that we had known of for many years to Moravian stars had appeared in an account of this boarding school's 50th anniversary in January 1821. Because we knew of this account, it could not be determined if the stars were actually developed and intended for display during Advent, as is considered the tradition today. In the January 1821 account, we learn that along the walkways visible in this photograph, lamps lighting up colored green, blue, red, and yellow transparent paper were positioned with stakes. In the middle of a line, which was strewn from the roof windows of this building and across to the windows of the dormitory, a star with 110 points hung in the middle of the courtyard, lit by a large lantern. According to one account, the star stood for Epiphany as an icon for the star of the wise men from the east, which made sense given the January date. So there was still no evidence, unfortunately, of the star being used early on in connection with Advent. Several years ago, a student from Lehigh University was cataloging a collection of personal papers preserved here at the Moravian Archives. The papers were from Georg Friedrich Bahnsen, a former pupil at the Niesky boarding school that we just saw in the previous picture. After Bahnsen received a call to serve as a Moravian pastor in America in 1829, he went on to serve a number of Moravian congregations in North Carolina and Pennsylvania. Moravian archivist, again, Paul Pieter, knew that Bahnsen's time at the Niesky boarding school overlapped with that 1821 period where the Moravian star was said to have been displayed for the anniversary of the school. Fortunately enough, Bahnsen kept a personal diary, which could be used to corroborate other accounts. In Bahnsen's diary entry, recorded for January 4th, 1821, we read that Im Hof hängt der große Stern aus dem Brüderhaus mit 110 Saken. Translated, we learn that in the courtyard hung the big star from the Brethren's house with 110 points. The way that this is written with the article the suggests that the star was familiar to Bahnsen. So backtracking in the diary to December 27th, 1820, we read, in the afternoon we all drank, and like yesterday, several went to see the star in the Brethren's house with 110 points made by Madsen. Or as Bahnsen wrote in German, besahen sich einige den Stern im Brüderhaus mit 110 Saken von Madsen gemacht. This entry is what tells us that the Moravian star was known to the Niesky community prior to 1821, and that the star was displayed in the Brethren's house in Niesky. Being a diary entry made in December, not January, also suggests to us that the first Moravian star was indeed associated with Christmas or Advent, rather than the 50th anniversary of the Niesky school in 1821, as had previously been thought. So who is this Madsen character, possible inventor of the Moravian star? So Christian Madsen, the 110-point star creator in the 1820 account from the previous slides, had been born on May 25th, 1800 in Herrnhut. At age 17, he began working in the metals and hardware shop at Niesky, where he constructed his impressive star remembered by Bahnsen in his diary. Madsen returned to Herrnhut in 1834 and married several times, and he eventually became the head of the tobacco factory in Herrnhut, where he served until his death in 1879. But that's all we know about Madsen. We also read of later accounts suggesting that the process of building Moravian stars may have been lost in Niesky over time, or it lost some traction in people's memory. In his memoir, Otmar Gemoseus, student at Niesky during the late 1830s and early 1840s, wrote, at the illumination ceremony of the 100th anniversary of the Niesky congregation on August 8th to 9th, 1842, young artisans hung up paper stars that had been lit, or they marched through the square in droves to the music of horns, carrying long poles and stars. some students of the boys' school asked how to be told how to make these stars. Thus, Moravian stars in summertime, that's my first confusion here. So we have come to believe that they would use for Advent. So why are they being displayed in summer? And also, what happened in the interim? Was the Moravian star forgotten at some point? There has to be a reason that the students in the Niesky boarding school are asking, how do they do that? It's obviously not something that is perceived as very common in the school any longer. So hopefully future research will reveal additional clues about what might have happened between 1820 and 1842, when it seems like far less people in Niesky knew about how to make these stars. In continuing our historical tracing of the Moravian star, we actually have to turn to another Moravian community in Germany known as Kleinwelke, where we actually had the oldest mission school for boys of the Moravian Church, which you see pictured here in this postcard. The first known description of putting together a Moravian star is found in an 1887 account of Kleinwelke, written by Samuel Boudert, a student at the school where the majority of children, like Boudert, had missionary parents. Boudert described the building of Moravian stars in Kleinwelke as a pleasant distraction for the young children who were homesick and spending holidays in a boarding school far, far away from their family. Boys who have come from far and wide for boarding school around Advent busily craft and sing, mostly songs they know by heart. He writes, "Come then, let us hasten yonder, hail the star that from far lights the dormitory." A contest known as Wandelabend would occur on the first Sunday of Advent, wherein students competed to exhibit the most beautiful parlor, especially by adorning their parlors with Moravian stars. Although I couldn't find such a photograph from the Kleinwelke school, this late 19th century photograph from the Moravian Archives in Herrnhut, Germany, shows a group of excited students in Niesky, that same school that we heard of before, as they decorate a parlor for Wandelabend. But back to Kleinwelke, the Moravian star still has a special place in Kleinwelke today, as can be seen in this photograph I snapped there inside the sanctuary of the congregation in the year 2015. This was hanging actually in March, so it's clear that some congregations hang stars outside of Advent or year-round. Those stars that were made in Niesky and Kleinwelke in the mid to late 1800s were never really made on a scale of mass production or with an intention to introduce to a non-Moravian audience. In 1892, there was a story that circulated of an unnamed Prussian soldier. This was reported in the Herrnhuter Wochenblatt, a Moravian newspaper in continental Europe. This soldier in the report made a star for his comrades in the barracks where he was stationed. His fellow soldiers and superior officers took a liking to the stars. Ultimately, they found a bookbinder in a city nearby. The soldier asked his comrades to build as many stars as possible. In the following year, they were able to put together 8 magnificent Advent stars through teamwork, and all of these stars were hung in the window of that nearby bookbinder. And of course, these were new, beautiful, innovative, and they were sold in no time. This story, as reported in the paper, was almost a calling for somebody to take upon the initiative to manufacture Moravian stars full-time, to do so in a mass production. 5 years later, it was this man pictured here, Pieter Hendrik Verbeek, in 1897, a former student from Niesky, who used his bookshop in Herrnhut, Germany, to first sell Moravian stars in mass quantity. Verbeek patented his invention in several countries in 1899, and he began serial production of Moravian stars in 1900. He signed a contract with the Moravian Church as well, and the proceeds as part of that contract helped support endeavors of the Moravian Church in various areas, such as mission work. Verbeek's advertisements expressed that these stars were not only confined to Christmas decorations, but that they were great for use in lanterns for garden parties, on verandas, arcades, hanging out in front of the Moravian Archives at various times of the year, things like that. While this pure paper star that Verbeek patented was very fragile, a more robust version developed in 1900 with a fixed body star body of sheet metal and rails. This patent was essentially for the metal skeletons. It was also for the hollow bodies and the different slots for paper points of hanging the stars. During this time, paper was also glued onto metal prongs, and that was another option for putting the star together. These stars were lit with a little oil lamp, I believe, that would last for 6 hours at a time. And the stars were really important. They were easy to assemble and disassemble, and they were easy to put away for storage after each use. So after these patents in 1900, I came and started looking in our collection and tried to find examples of Moravian stars in North America. The earliest photograph I was able to find of a Moravian star in America using our archival collections is this photograph of the pulpit in Nazareth Moravian Church, located in nearby Nazareth, Pennsylvania, just a few miles from me here in Bethlehem. So from this, we can say that Moravian stars were used in America no later than 1907. And thanks to advances in technology, we can hypothesize from colorization of the black and white photograph that the star hanging in this 1907 pulpit was yellow. More on star colors in a moment. Advertisements such as this 1923 calendar brochure advertise the Moravian stars being sold by Pieter Verbeek through the Mission bookstore in Herrnhut. The Moravian transparent Advent and Christmas star brings light and joy into every home. Soon they would adorn American homes, as in 1926, the Moravian Church in North America purchased 3,600 Moravian stars. So that was in January of 1926. And even though there was this big order in 1926, we know that the stars were being sold by the Moravian bookshop in Bethlehem by 1924. At that point in time, folks could purchase stars from the bookshop in alternating white and red, or all white. In 1929, the bookshop began selling yellow stars as well. I mentioned earlier that the 1907 Moravian star in nearby Nazareth was apparently yellow. This may not be a worldwide debate, but I understand that folks in the Lehigh Valley have long debated that Moravian stars are either traditionally white or they're traditionally yellow. But I suspect that the earliest Moravian stars, like the 110-point star made by Christian Madsen, were multicolored, either by using paints or by covering points in colored transparent papers. We know that various early Moravian stars used a combination of white, red, blue, and green. Eventually, yellow was added into this mix. It's fair to say that the traditional, or shall we say symbolic colors by the end of the 19th century were perceived to be red and white. Dorothea Tyler wrote that Moravian children in Herrnhut long learned about symbolism behind the red and white elements of the star. The white points alluded to the swaddling cloth in the manger of Jesus Christ, the manger where Jesus Christ was born innocent and pure. The red points, alternatively, alluded to the blood Jesus spilled for us at his death. Thus, the white and red symbolized the birth and death of Jesus Christ. This star advertisement from 1912 that I found in our collection confirms that red and white alternating pointed Moravian stars were perhaps most common in the very beginning of mass production. The advertisement tells customers that it costs an extra 20 cents to get a Moravian star with all red points, coated using red dye 40, an ingredient we're all familiar with. We also read a testimonial on this advertisement from a non-Moravian German university hospital that regularly used the stars in its campus, stating that the stars annually bring joy into the many homes. Perhaps they're referring to the light and hope that the stars provided to sick patients on the hospital campus. But I mentioned that Moravian stars eventually reached extremely far and wide, leaving the boundaries of Germany and making their way into communities around the world. Old photographs show Moravian stars in various former mission fields, now independent provinces of the worldwide Moravian Church. Pictured here are some examples I was able to find with some having previously appeared in Theodor Bechler's 1914 publication, Weihnachten in aller Welt, or Christmas all over the world. So here we can see a Moravian star in Suriname, and we also see a Moravian star in Kitunda in Tanzania. We see some additional examples here of a Moravian star in Bluefields, Nicaragua, and we also see a Moravian star here in Tinana, South Africa. Lastly, we see a Moravian star here in, this would be Nain, Labrador in 1939. And this is a photograph of Moravian missionaries Paul and Ellen Marie Hatash as they appear in the middle of their Christmas decorations. And we see, again, from colorization, that the star in the background appears to be a red and white star. And the reason this is pretty neat is that at this time, we know that the Moravian star proceeds went directly into the support of mission work. So to see the stars make their way into the mission field and on display in various ways kind of has it coming full circle. So just want to talk briefly about what happened during the 20th century and how we arrive at today and the production of Moravian stars. So we learned a little bit about Pieter Verbeek, who had his company from 1899 to 1924, the factory of stationery and cardboard goods. Eventually, with his son Harry, they started Stern GmbH, Sterngesellschaft MBH, in Herrnhut, Germany in 1925. And this lasted until 1939. Stern GmbH continued into World War II. However, the factory itself was very much called into the total war effort of Germany in 1939. During the late 1930s, they had made a pretty big splash in the worldwide market of lampshades and the development of other lighting hardware. So not just Moravian stars, but like I said, in the World War II period, the Star Factory primarily made products in support of the war effort, with some occasional star sales. I think they made like leather jackets, and I think they made some canned goods and so forth. So the Moravian Bookshop in Bethlehem initially sold stars that were produced from that Moravian Star Factory that we just learned about. These were also sold by the Salem Bookstore in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. However, during those World War II years, because of a drop in production and a drop in availability of the Moravian stars from Europe, Julius Leimbach, a Winston-Salem resident, began making Moravian stars on his own accord. And he did so for the next 20 years, and it was eventually succeeded by his son, and who continued on in that business. And today we see the production of Moravian Advent stars by companies big and small around the world, which is an amazing thing. Let me first return to the original Moravian Star Factory in Herrnhut before going any further. So what happened after World War II? So after those difficult post-World War II rebuilding years, the Star Factory in 1951 was ultimately nationalized by the communist East German government. It was given the name the People's Enterprise Star and Lampshade Factory of Upper Lusatia. Derninger and Company, who had previously partnered with the Moravian Church in the production of Moravian stars during the 1920s and 1930s, took the lead on manufacture and marketing of the stars in East Germany. Something really interesting happened, a very big surprise. In 1967, I believe, the East German government offered the Moravian Church the ability to reassume control of the company, which was really rare for dispossessed businesses in East Germany that the government had seized control of, to be given back to an entity that had had control of a business beforehand. And so in 1969, this actually took place. And the Moravian Church renamed the business the electrical fixture, I think the electrical fixture firm of the Moravian Church. Here in our collection, we actually have, so if you stop looking at my slides for a moment and take a look at my screen, we actually have Christmas stars from Herrnhut, Germany, from 1969, that first year when Moravian Stars came back into the possession of the Moravian Church. So when this factory was again taken over by Moravians. And in the instructions, I think it's kind of interesting. In the German instructions, there's a whole explanation for the assembling of the stars that explains that they are an Advent and Christmas star. So that confirms our earlier, and you can see it right on the box, Advent and Christmas star. Our earlier idea that these stars are in connection with Advent and Christmas. What's interesting is, let me show you the American. If you're looking at my screen, the American box. So this is also produced by the Herrnhut Star Factory, but the American box just calls it the Moravian Herrnhut Star. And the instructions don't say anything about it being assembled for Christmas or Advent. So maybe that was a clever marketing technique to sell the stars for all occasions in North America or other Anglophone countries of the world at the time. Okay, so I mentioned that we have those boxes here. It's my understanding that in Germany, it was always important that the Christmas connection was sought to be maintained in the German advertising and instructions because it enhanced the star's economic value in Germany. It had to be sold as a Moravian Advent and Christmas star. This is pretty important for the marketing of the star itself. To take that away from it would be like taking, I'm going to think of a really bad analogy, but like a Neapolitan or let's say calling Brut champagne. The Moravian Star needed to be associated with the Advent and Christmas holiday for its purposes of sale, especially in particular markets. Speaking of markets, with German reunification in 1990, Moravian Stars became widely available at the newly created Christmas markets in Saxony, Saxony-Anhalt, and beyond, certainly contributing to their worldwide proliferation, not just in Germany, but really because German Christmas markets and even Christmas market tours in Germany have become more and more popular in the last 20 years. I know that my grandmother, who's listening, that doesn't know a word in German, has done a Rhine River tour and seen Christmas markets for the purpose of seeing Christmas markets in Germany. So the Star Factory in Herrnhut, as a result of this flooded market of new consumer goods, stepped up its own production and sales, and they established what we know of today as the Herrnhuter Sterne factory in Herrnhut, so the Moravian Star Factory in Herrnhut. So this was in 1991, and this business continues to be the name of the original Moravian Star producers in Herrnhut, Germany today. The Star Factory in Herrnhut, Germany built a new facility and visitor center, seen here at right, in 2008. I snapped this photograph in February 2015. You can see it looks like a very pleasant place to visit. It must be, because over 50,000 visitors stop into the visitor center annually, where during set hours of the week, employees of the company kindly offer different demonstrations of their work in creating the original Moravian Stars by hand. So it's still something that is done by hand today at the original Moravian Star Factory in Herrnhut, Germany. The practice of hanging up a Moravian Star on the evening before the first Sunday of Advent, this year that will be Sunday, November 29th, 2020. The star would be hung up on the first Sunday of Advent, and then traditionally it would stay up until Epiphany, which in this cycle will be January 6th, 2021. Advent symbolically marks the quote arrival of the Son of God into the world. Christians prepare for his arrival during these days. The light of an Advent star invites us to quietly reflect, to set aside haste and hurry. And like I did so with my parents for the first time in 2013, families enjoy putting together their star in a cozy circle, telling stories, reading stories aloud, testing Christmas cookies, drinking eggnog, singing carols, and much more. And all of this creates an intimate atmosphere of belonging and security. And I'm reminded that I'm home when I pull into my parents' driveway. I haven't seen them in a while, and I pull in the driveway in the dark, and I see their glowing red and yellow Moravian Star from the original Moravian Star Factory in Herrnhut. But the star can have other meanings as well. And I want to share just a few slides because I think this meaning is very dynamic. It's different for everyone. The star can have other meanings. The Moravian star can be remembered as a gift from one friend to another, as we see here in this light up Moravian star being gifted from a longtime archives volunteer on the right to a Moravian archivist from Germany as he says his goodbyes and prepares to head home. The Moravian star can also be seen as a community symbol. So for all the folks in Winston-Salem, you will probably recognize this Moravian star from the city of Winston-Salem, North Carolina. It is the largest Moravian star in the world, first appearing in 1992. I believe it's on top of Wake Forest Baptist Medical Center in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. From point to point, it measures 31 feet long, weighs 3,400 pounds. It takes 2 days, a crew, and a crane to assemble. The city of Winston-Salem first started to use Moravian stars in conjunction with street decorations for Christmas in the year 1959, I believe. And during the year 1959, in 64 different locations around Winston-Salem, Moravian stars were hung from light poles throughout the city. And acts like this, community acts like this do help spread the use of Moravian stars as a decorative element during Advent. Moravian stars can also have personal meaning, like this custom glass star that a gentleman from Hamburg, Pennsylvania, shared with me after a Moravian star presentation I gave in Hamburg a few years ago. Apparently, this glass star was passed down through the family and had been made by the father, who was a skilled glass worker. So I thought it was pretty neat that he just sent me an email after I presented to say, here's one for my family. It means so much to me. Every year we hang it up, and it's also something of heritage from our family and a family member who was a glass worker. As I paged through an old issue of Herrnhuter Wochenblatt, a weekly newspaper of the Moravian Church in continental Europe, I came across this article called Der Stern der Heimat, or the Star of the Homeland. The author from Herrnhut describes feeling alone, homesick, and a bit lost while on a business trip in Berlin, to them, a city that is foreign to them. As they strolled along the Wilhelmstrasse, there in the distance, they spotted a familiar Moravian star that brought them immediately home, all of their insecurities and other bad emotions at the time fading away. And it reminded them of the many other meanings of the star, some of which that I've described today, a sense of belonging, a family, of Jesus Christ as light of the world. I bring up this story because the Moravian star has had a similar impact for me. While I've been traveling by myself in a foreign country, I've been comforted on not just one, but more than one occasion by the unexpected sight of a Moravian star in a town over 4,000 miles away from my home in Bethlehem. It makes the world feel smaller, familiar, manageable, and it also brings up many of those things that I mentioned in the symbolic meaning of the Moravian star. So perhaps the Moravian star has additional meanings to you as well. So as I continue researching this topic, I look forward to hearing your stories, any questions you may have, and hope that today I've left you with a deeper understanding of the Moravian star's rich history and symbolism. If you're interested in purchasing a Moravian star from the archives, you learned from Paul at the beginning of today's presentation that the proceeds from star purchases will go towards the restoration of a damaged, fainting painting in our collection of the Zinzendorf family from the early 1700s. I believe it's the oldest painting in our collection. At both of these web addresses that you see here on this slide, you'll see two places from which the Moravian Archives, us here in Bethlehem, at these two links, we sell the original Moravian stars that we learned about from Herrnhut, Germany. Those proceeds, as I mentioned, go towards the restoration fund of that painting. And Advent is rapidly approaching if you want to get your star up in time. Remember, I said that was November 29th, so we're just 2 weeks away now. If you're watching this presentation real time, live on November 14th, 2020, I'll tell you that our office manager at the archives, Kelly Gibbons, will be here in the archives until 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. That's Greenwich Meridian time -5 if you're working on international time around the world. You can call us at 610-866-3255 if you have any questions. And you can also connect with us during normal business hours, Monday to Friday, 8 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. Again, our telephone number, as listed in the red font here, is 610-866-3255. We look forward to hearing from you. Let me thank you once again for tuning in to this presentation today. I hope you learned quite a bit about the history of the Moravian Star, and I'll pass this back over to Paul Pieter, who has kindly agreed to moderate our question and answer session.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you for an illuminating presentation on the history of the Moravian Star. History of the Moravian Star goes back very far, and yet it didn't really become popular until the 20th century. Thank you for also your personal insights and showing us how seeing a Moravian star can provide a sense of home and familiarity. So really grateful for that. And I see we have some reactions in the chat of people. Someone with the name Lineback, maybe a relative to the person who produced the stars in Winston-Salem, put in the chat that the huge star in Winston-Salem on the Wake Forest Medical Center was reinstalled earlier this year to commemorate the work against COVID-19. And that is also a very impressive symbol. I see a question here. I'm not sure if you can answer that, but one person is asking if there's any history on the star that hangs in the sanctuary at Central Church here in Bethlehem.
Paul, you may know this as a member of Central Moravian Church and a member of the History Committee. I know about the star that hangs in the belfry during Advent in Central Moravian Church. That does come from the original Moravian Star factory in Herrnhut, Germany. The star that hangs outside of the church in the belfry during the Advent season every year. There is an interesting story about that particular star in the belfry. I remember a couple years ago, that star was knocked down due to inclement weather. Maybe there were really strong winds or a rainstorm at that star, that very large star hanging in Central Moravian Church's belfry. And the star factory in Herrnhut was very quick to produce new points for this custom, very large star and sent them to Central Moravian Church in a very quick turnaround that allowed them to have that star repaired in time for Advent, at least some of the Sundays of Advent that it could be lit. Paul, do you know more about a star in the sanctuary?
I know that the star inside is much older and was made by people in Bethlehem to look exactly like the stars that were produced in Herrnhut, but the star is made here by volunteers. And we need to look into finding some names that are associated with that. People are also impressed with the name for the base of the star and your ability to pronounce that very quickly. Someone is asking, is there a term for the base of a star with 110 points?
You know, that's a great question. I looked that up yesterday, as if I would be ready for this question. However, what I found in discussion board threads, I think there are people that want to make this in their home. And so a number of people were asking in discussion threads, and I can picture who they are, knowing some Moravians from around the world. I feel like I know who the people are in these discussion threads, but they were asking if there's a name for that shape with the bases before you add the points to it, making it a 110-point star. And from my understanding, there is not a name. It's called some type of irregular. Let me see if I can pull up this link that I was looking at yesterday. Okay. It's on the Mathematics Stack Exchange website. So someone says that it is called in a regular, yeah, it's way complicated. I'll share this link in the chat that I was reading yesterday.
Very good.
Unfortunately, I cannot answer the question. I apologize.
We also got a reaction from the archivist from Germany that you showed in one of your slides. He was pleased to see his picture here, and that also shows that through Zoom we're connected worldwide. I think our last question that I have here is, can you say a little bit more about how people used to light the stars before we had electricity?
Oh, yes. So I believe that the first oil that was used was rapeseed oil. If anyone's familiar with rapsa, or the type of crop, rape that can be used to make rapeseed oil, which is somewhat similar to canola oil, very flat, can be heated very hot, but is also extremely flammable. So Moravian Stars would have a little oil lamp in them with rapeseed oil, would be inside of, for the most part, paper or pulp-based stars. So you can imagine that was somewhat of a fire hazard, having small tissue paper stars encapsulating a little oil lamp with rapeseed oil, very flammable. I believe by the early 20th century, electric lighting was available in the Moravian Stars, and that was a patented early design of Pieter, Hendrik, Verbeek, who we saw in some of the slides today.
Thank you. Very good. I think you have all answered the questions that people have. Thank you, Tom, for your presentation. Thank you to all the participants this morning for being part of this. Yes, if you have any research questions, you can send us an email. If you want to research your ancestors, like people are asking, you can send an email to us at info@moravianchurcharchives.org, and we will get back to you. So thank you for the presentation. We have another event coming up, again by Zoom, that will be this Tuesday, 4 o'clock Eastern Time, and that is a lecture on Benigna von Zinzendorf in America, and that is part of our current ongoing Zinzendorf exhibit. And the lecture is by Marita Gruner, who will speak live from Germany. And if you're interested in this lecture, you can sign up by clicking the link on our website. But all the participants will also receive an email with that information. And this lecture has been recorded, and next week we will post this to our YouTube channel. I think that's where we will leave you this morning. Thank you all for being part of this. Tom, thank you for your presentation. And remember, if you are interested in an original Moravian star, this is the place to get one. Thank you.